Hello everyone, it's Jenny from Gertens, Lawn and Garden Department Manager, and we've been getting a lot of questions about the Japanese beetles because the adults are out and active, so we wanted to do a Facebook Live so you guys can ask your questions and let's go from there.
Yep, yeah. So one of the first questions we have is just about Japanese beetles. What are they and why are they such a problem?
So Japanese beetles are an invasive species that come from Japan. They've actually been in the United States since 1916 and in Minnesota since around 2011, maybe a little earlier. We have the right climate. We have no natural predators, whereas in Japan they have natural predators, so they stay in control. And we also have a really good food source for them.
So if someone wants to spray for Japanese beetles, what's the best time of day to spray for them?
You don't ever want to do it in the heat of the day. And because you're spraying insecticides, you want to choose a time when bees aren't foraging. So like later in the evening, so like sprays, we have natural sprays, low impact sprays, more residual chemical sprays. But you want to be doing that either early in the morning or later in the evening when bees are done foraging.
And would you spray it when the Japanese beetles are present, or is that more preventative?
So it kind of depends. You have contact sprays like neem oil right here. Japanese, that's going to be a contact spray. Spinosad is a great organic insecticide. That's still a contact spray even though it has residual. The pyrethroids, which are chemical based, we have permethrin and lambda cyhalothrin. Those two are contact sprays, but they also have a residual for 2 to 3 weeks. So it's going to be most effective to spray it when they're active and you can see them, but night's a good time because they're sluggish, the Japanese beetles are, whereas during the day they're active. And then you have systemics, and that's something that translocates through the plants, but we'll probably have a question about that later.
What would you use this? When would you use the systemic?
So the systemics we have here are imidacloprid and dinotefrin, and you don't want to apply those to flowering plants. They are both neonicotinoids, which just mean that they're more toxic to bees and beneficial pollinators. So for smaller leafy green things, you can apply them now, right? They translocate through the plants pretty fast. But for larger trees, they're good for birch trees, which are targeted by Japanese beetles. Those you really want to do it. You always want to do systemic when they're actively growing, but you want to do it earlier so that it's translocated through the whole plant. Because for like a large mature tree, it could take 4 weeks, kind of depending on the health of the tree and how good the vascular system is. Not to say that you couldn't do it now, and imidacloprid and dinotefrin are good for a year within a tree, but you might not see the effects for the Japanese beetles eating in the top of the canopy.
You kind of touched on this, but if someone wanted to treat their raspberry bushes or plants, what would you recommend for that?
For raspberries or any vegetable or fruit, I really would suggest Spinosad. Not only is it a contact insecticide, it does have residual, and really we're talking about 6 to 8 weeks where the adults are out feeding.
Is that organic?
And it's rated for organic gardening. So you can spray for it, you got to refer to the label, but for raspberries, you can spray up to the day before harvest. And Spinosad is derived from a bacterium that's naturally occurring in soil. So it is an insecticide. It has slight toxicity to beneficial pollinators, but it's a very low impact and not as dangerous.
Gotcha. Another question that we had was about traps. So people were wondering about traps. Do they actually work?
They do work. They capture a lot of Japanese beetles. This is what they're referring to, and it's a pheromone. The problem with these is that they were used originally to determine where populations existed, more on a management, like strategic level, when to start applying and treating for them. So if you live in the city or in a residential area, I would not suggest these. They can attract more beetles than they will kill. So by putting this, you might kill a lot, and it's exciting because it's like, look at all the ones I caught, but you're probably attracting all the beetles from your neighbor's yard and your other neighbor's yard, and they can fly up to 5 miles. So unless, where this can be effective is, but I say this with caution, is if you have a large lot and you can put it on one side of the lot and you have your garden over here, right? Trying to draw them away from your desirable plants. It can be effective that way.
Bouncing back to the vegetables and plants, can they die from being chewed on?
So young, unhealthy plants with severe defoliation can, right, you're taking away their source for food, for photosynthesizing. It can lead to death. Mature perennial plants that are healthy can handle the defoliation. Year after year of severe defoliation is going to start causing those plants to get stressed out.
Do you have an example?
I do. So the Japanese beetle is a skeletonizer, and what that means is they chew the leaf tissue around the veins of the plant. And that's the adults that do that. The larvae eat the roots of grass and plants, typically grass, but this is adult feeding. That's what we're seeing right now. And that is also what all these, this is all treating adults. This is not treating the grubs that are in our ground.
And the adults are around, do they have like a lifespan?
Yep, so they have a lifespan of 1 year, but so they come out either late June to mid-July, like early July. So we've seen them for about a week. And I have a bunch caught here in soapy water. And you can see, let me see if I can take one of these guys out. They're pretty distinctive. They're emerald green. I don't know if this is going to work very well. And they got the copper wings. When they're not wet, you can see little white tufts of hair at the butt, and that is, or at the hind end, and that is really distinctive. There's like 5 there. But most people know who these guys are now. You can go online and see a lot more up close pictures. And then this kind of shows you the life cycle. But so adults are going to come out late June, early July. And within 2 weeks of the adults coming out of the ground, the females start laying their eggs. And they'll dig down into the soil about 3 to 4 inches and lay their eggs. And they'll do this multiple times, each female laying about 40 to 60 eggs. And then they start, and they have 3 different life stages as larvae, right? They're called instars. And they start up high and they're feeding on your beautiful roots of your turf. And then they go down as the soil starts to cool, anywhere from 4 to 8 inches. And that's where they overwinter. And then in the spring, when it starts warming up, that's where they come up until they pupate and become adults again. And that's the life cycle of the Japanese beetle.
While we're on the topic of grubs, someone was wondering about grub control and if it works if they apply.
It does work. Just because you treat for grubs does not mean you're gonna not have adults though. And I try to really explain that to customers when they come in. The U of M suggests treating your turf if in a square foot you have 10 grubs. That's kind of like the threshold of, as far as like integrated pest management goes, where like when do we need to use chemicals to control it. They're gonna do the most damage to your lawn here, right? They're also gonna feed a little bit before they pupate in the spring. But this in August, if you start, so right now, sorry to skip, but you can do for like mid-June to mid-July is a good time to do preventative grub, right? So if you're seeing brown spots, if you can grab your grass and just pull it up, or even like, now you're not going to see the grubs, but you can put like here, pull it up and you'll actually see the grubs under your grass. So from mid-June to mid-July is a good time to do a preventative grub killer. As far as like systemic grub killers, this would be a preventative. Imidacloprid is the active ingredient. So once again, you're not going to want to use this around flowering plants, and you just keep your grass mowed. You know, so if you have any flowering weeds. And then in August is when a lot of people will start seeing damage to their grass, and then you can do a curative treatment, like trichloroform, which is like a 24-hour grub killer. Aside from, and these work, right? They kill the grubs, but it just doesn't mean that you won't have adults. Another really good organic natural way to control grubs is beneficial nematodes. This little box carries 7 million nematodes, and it treats about 2,000 square feet. What they do is they enter the grub larvae and then they repopulate. And so once you apply it, you're going to start seeing a bigger and bigger population. Super good alternative.
We have one question from our watcher. Do you have any recommendations about white flies? Kind of a different topic, but... Or else they could stop in and...
Yeah, I would stop into Lawn and Garden. We can talk about white flies and specific to how they're bothering you.
Yep. And yeah, for any questions, people can stop in.
Oh, absolutely. Come to Lawn and Garden anytime. Everyone in Lawn and Garden department is happy to help you and answer any question.
And then we had one more question from Lindsay, who asks, what should she use on flowering trees for Japanese beetles?
That's kind of a hard one. So you specifically cannot use imidacloprid or dinotephrine on the Tilia species, which includes linden trees, which is one of their favorite trees to eat. So linden or basswood. You cannot use it on that. You can consult with a professional arborist and see how they treat it. If your tree's small enough, you could spray it, right? If you have a young linden or birch tree, or for flowering trees. Otherwise, so besides Tilia and besides basswood and lindens, you can apply imidacloprid after they're done flowering. So it kind of depends on the species, but not for edible trees.
Gotcha. Sounds good. For the ones that you've talked about so far, are those gonna be any danger to good bugs or bugs that are helpful?
Yeah, an insecticide is an insecticide. Some are more toxic, and so like I said, we have the low impact, like neem oil, but you're gonna have to apply that a lot. That's extracted from the neem tree. And then the Japanese beetle killer is pyrethrins, which are derived from the chrysanthemum. And then you have Spinosad, which we talked about, which is a naturally occurring bacterium. You know, there's also, we didn't talk about like mechanical removal. If you have a very low population, you can remove them and put them in soapy water. That's what we did here. You don't want to smush them, that'll attract more. And once they feed on a leaf, that feeding releases an odor that also attracts more. So if you can stay on top of it and pick off leaves as they're chewed on, I know avid gardeners with large gardens, that's crazy and kind of unmanageable, but there's also screens. You can screen your plants. You don't want to put any netting over flowering plants though, because you want them to be pollinated.
Another question from our audience from Debbie asks about hostas and if they affect those or are attracted to those at all.
They not necessarily. That's not like one of their top ones, but they Japanese beetles feed on over 300 species of plants. So they have the ones they love: roses, Virginia creeper, linden trees, birch. You can look up a list of all the different ones that they really prefer. But not to say that they won't eat ones when there's no other food source.
Gotcha. After you use some of these preventative treatments, how would you dispose of them?
As long as they're empty, you should be able to, for the natural ones, put them in your recycling. I bring all of mine you can bring it to your local hazardous waste recycling center. I would refer to the label and the manufacturer depending on the chemical.
Gotcha. And then once you, like we see in this jar, we have the Japanese Beetles. Do you have any recommendations of disposal of those?
Yes, black bag and in the garbage. Don't just dump them in your yard.
Yep, perfect. Awesome. Do you know anything about Winsome Flies?
Yes,
Flies?
yes. So there's actually 2 predators that have been introduced in the United States to combat Japanese beetles, and the fly is from Japan as well, and they're established. Even though their establishment hasn't really reduced the population, it's a start. So I don't have a picture of the fly, but if you Google it, what they do is they lay their eggs on. I'm gonna grab this guy. They lay their eggs on the head of female Japanese beetles. So right there, the thorax on the green, you'll see little white bumps, like little white circles, and those will be the eggs of the fly. And what they do is they'll kill the adult and then repopulate within the beetle. So if you're manually picking off the beetles and you see little white dots, leave those, because it's going to help increase the population for the fly.
Gotcha. Carol asked about, back to flowers, rosebuds. Do you have treatment for that? And then same with raspberries. Someone asked about raspberries again.
Yeah, raspberries, I would stick. I mean, even with roses, I'm a big fan of Spinosad. It's a low impact insecticide, so it's just safer for our beneficial pollinators. Once the roses can actually handle defoliation from Japanese beetles pretty well. But the buds and the flowers, if they get eaten, they usually don't, they fall off. And
There's a question about how to dispose of those beetles that are in liquid.
same thing, I would just put them in a bag. If you want to rip the bag out, it's soapy water, but I would just put the water in the bag and throw it in the garbage and call it a day.
Yeah. Next, another topic someone asked about was weather and if it affects Japanese beetles and their movement or...
So I'm hoping in my phenology book that they don't like dry soil, right? So because of the drought last year, hopefully some of those eggs didn't make it through to the larval stage. When I say that, we have a good food source, especially in urban areas, but we have a lot of well-irrigated, lush, thick lawns. Especially if you're a lawn and garden customer, then you know how to get those good long root systems. But they feed on that, and so that's a great food source. So it's not really a weather thing, but so drought, dry conditions.
Perfect. And then Nate was asking about if they migrate at all or move along. Stay pretty local.
So the adults can fly 5 miles, about 5 miles a lifespan, which is 1 year. And they came to New Jersey in 1916. And if you think about the fact that they're at Minnesota, if you go on to either the U.S. Department of Ag, the DNR, you can see there's a lot of resources out there where you can see the fine map of where they are, but they're moving westward. And they're really here to stay. I don't see, without any natural predators, there's life cycles and stuff, but it's just something that we're going to have to learn to manage.
Like emerald ash borer?
Similar to emerald ash borer, except that emerald ash borer only attacks ash trees. So we're talking about 300 species. It'd be different. So with the ash trees, you treat it or they die. So at some point they're not going to have a food source. Will they find something else to eat? Possibly, but with Japanese beetles it's harder because they eat so much.
Sure. Yep. One more question about preventative actions. Are there any that are safe for kids and pets, or any that you would recommend for kids and pets around?
I would highly suggest that more people look into beneficial nematodes. They're safe for humans, they're safe for pets. They're microscopic, you don't even see them. You soak them in water and you spray it. That's a really good natural thing that we can do to keep the larvae down without laying synthetic chemicals.
Is there a specific time that you need to use those?
No, you can use it anytime, but they feed on the larvae, so you're going to want it when the larvae, I mean, really anytime, really, the eggs start coming. What else? For kids and pets, I mean, I would just say always doing something more low impact. Whether you use a synthetic chemical or an organic chemical, when you apply it to something, you have to wait for it to dry, right? Whether it's in the grass or sprayed on something. The lower the toxicity, the safer when you're talking about your vegetable gardens and stuff.
And then not in wind?
Never ever spray when it's windy. There's little drift molecules that the human eye doesn't see, so you never want to spray anything when it's windy.
Yep. Are there anything else you want to touch on?
No, you're not off the top of my head. Great questions, but if you come up with more, anyone in the lawn and garden department is happy to help you. Go get those beetles.